I must apologise to our international viewers for my hair today. Now, this is explained by my newest book, The Brain from Beyond. There. Now, if I take off the dust jacket, I will reveal the brain within, but also, there is the brain within, but also, most importantly, this photograph of my hair by the Italian surrealist painter Giorgio di Chirico. So, all is explained. Welcome to an important chat show about the lack of science fiction within science fiction. Starring Roberto Quaglia.
And Ian Watson.
And the Radiator.
Yes.
The Radiator will not say very much during this discussion. Now, Roberto.
The Radiator, nevertheless, symbolizes the monolith of 2001 because it has the same shape.
Yeah, exactly. And the same appearance, almost. So if I suddenly pick up a bone and throw it into the air, you will understand what is happening.
And monkeys will magically appear.
Now, yesterday, Roberto, you made the very important observation that in science fiction books about the future, we do not find science fiction writers.
You think that I'm more intelligent than actually I am, because I made this observation 20 years ago when I was really intelligent, inside the souvenir book of the science fiction World Con in Glasgow in '95. But then completely forgot about that and became more stupid. But due to the invention of printings and publications, I happened to read again what I read 20 years ago, and so now we can exploit this very old insight.
Yeah, and due to some nice wine in La Galana, Vigneteria here in Gijon, we remembered. Now, I'm not referring, by the lack of science fiction within science fiction, to such things as the imaginary novel inside of Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle, an alternate present where the Nazis and the Japanese did not win the World War, the Second World War, that is. I'm referring to the fact that Roberto was referring to the fact that in science fiction novels set in the future, we do not see science fiction writers themselves writing science fiction set in what is the future for them. Or, if there are some examples of this, we do not know what they are. Now, why is this?
This is like an epidemic of among science fiction writers, is an epidemic of lack of imagining themselves in the future, basically. They cannot imagine that the future will contain science fiction writers. They can contain every kind of technological gadgets, but they forget themselves, they cannot project themselves in the future into a next generation of science fiction writers.
Yeah, we have future art forms, dance, music, and so forth.
Future religions.
Future religions, but there is not future science fiction. Now, suppose that the future we are talking about is 200 years ahead. Well, why would this be? Obviously, there is a continuity with the present, unless civilization collapses, unless an electromagnetic pulse wipes out all digital records of science fiction, and all books are either thrown away or burned in order to keep us hot. But in this future 200 years ahead, assuming that there is some kind of normal continuation, is it that everything is already known about the universe, so there is no point in writing exciting stories about people making great cosmic discoveries? I doubt this will be the case, because the history of science in the 20th and 21st century shows a vast enlargement of our knowledge, but also there are more questions unanswered progressively than questions that are answered. At the moment, we interpret the universe in terms of dark matter and dark energy, for which there is no evidence, really, objectively at all. And it may be that there is some completely different explanation why, for example, a galaxy rotates faster than it ought to, according to the laws of gravity, which would throw itself apart. But something holds it together as it rotates very quickly, to which we give the name dark matter.
The invention of dark matter, actually, it's quite bizarre. It's almost a religious one, because instead of adapting the theory to reality, if the theory are not appropriate enough, like the scientists should do, well, of course, you may not be able to do it because of too much complexity, but instead of doing that, you change reality according, to fit it your theories. So you invent incredible quantities of unexisting matter. You call it dark because you cannot see it. You say, since my theory must be right, or I think it is right, then this matter must exist, which is nonsense in my sense.
Well, yeah, but theoretically there would not be enough of it even so. So you must invent dark energy as well.
Yes. And for this reason they arrived to invent Darth Vader. No, this is not Dark Vader, it's Darth Vader, sorry.
Yeah.
But coming back to the unexisting science fiction in the future.
Yes.
This is completely implausible, and the fact that the science fiction authors forget to include themselves in the future or their descendants in the future has another proof. They also forget about the existing science fiction. I mean, in the future, they will never again read what has been written before in the field of science fiction. I mean, we read the old literature, we read Shakespeare, which was hundreds of years ago. But apparently, in the future, nobody will read Asimov, Heinlein, Ian Watson, and Roberto Quaglia. They forget to write that we exist in the literature of the future, which is unforgivable.
Yes. And it does not matter that the classic science fiction is disproven by facts, that there are no jungles on the planet Venus, for example. We still read and treasure these stories. I wrote a couple.
It's part of history of literature.
It's part of it, and as is Shakespeare, even though his vision of foreign countries and ancient times was extremely conditioned by living in the Elizabethan period.
And we have the paradox that in the future we find occasionally Shakespeare in science fiction works as an existing literature of the future, but not science fiction. It's like everything which came later, has been erased from our future.
A long time ago, decades, I wrote a couple of stories about this. One was called the World Science Fiction Convention of, 2070 or something, 100 years later than a World Science Fiction Convention which I went to. And this story is set after the collapse of civilization, but science fiction fandom lives on. There is still a World Science Fiction Convention every 3 years. It takes a long time, 6 months, to travel across the oceans infested by pirates, or to ride on a sledge pulled by dogs towards whatever is the designated convention site, and probably only about 130 people will arrive there. But when they do arrive there, they celebrate particularly the fact that the classic science fiction, oceans of Venus, jungles of Venus, has been rescued and recuperated by the collapse of civilization. There will never be future journeys into space from the future Earth. The stars belong again to the science fiction writers, because whatever was written before can no longer be invalidated. And the other story which I wrote, which is relevant, was called The Big Buy. This is about aliens arriving on Earth, landing in the desert in Australia and issuing a call for whatever they might wish to purchase from Earth. Now, what uniquely terrestrial would they find? It would not be machinery because they could make it themselves. They have enough technology to travel between the stars. It would probably not be unique spices to add flavouring to alien meals because those are agglomerations of chemicals which they could synthesize. And finally, the only thing which they choose which is worth buying from Earth are old science fiction stories, because no other species in the galaxy has actually written science fiction. And this is astonishing to the aliens, that a species on planet Earth should devote so much time and energy to imagining aliens and imagining alien worlds. So the trade deal is done, and there is suddenly a new life for science fiction writers, with new editions translated into the language of the beings around Sirius and Canopus and the other stars. This is another version of the same era, possibly, because it assumes that no aliens would ever write speculative works about the future. Now, there are many kinds of aliens. We must not just think of humanoid aliens like ourselves, but with 6 fingers. We must think of octopuses and insects and blah, 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 blah. But they have all achieved a high technological civilization status, yet none of them have actually written imaginative works speculating about the future.
This is another big lack in the world of science fiction literature. No science fiction author has ever imagined an alien civilization, which usually are very intelligent, having themselves developed science fiction authors. It's like being an author of science fiction makes you blind against the existence of people like you. You know, you look yourself. You look at the world, which does not contain you. It's quite interesting. So the concept that other forms of science fiction can exist, like other forms of life can exist, is simply missing.
And of course, art forms pursued by aliens, for example, provided that there is imaginative content in these, might include the creation of virtual reality games, virtual realities, and it is possible that somewhere 2 galaxies away there is an alien civilization which devotes a huge amount of its time, just as we do here, to a multiplayer virtual reality simulation adventure game featuring an alien species, us.
Yes, it's quite plausible. After all, this would explain why we exist, first of all.
Well, it would do.
I think it's a more likely scenario than the Big Bang Theory.
Well, it explains why we still exist. For example, we were very close to having global thermonuclear war, but it did not happen, which seems quite unlikely. I mean, for example, the American military had codes to prevent the accidental launching of nuclear weapons. And it turned out after 30 years that the code number was simply 0000. According to what the American government had specified, the codes were supposed to be changed every day into 157946 blah blah blah. But for 30 or 40 years they remained 0000.
Perhaps they just changed the position of the zeros.
The position of the zeros. Anyhow. So in fact it is quite likely that we should have had at least an accidental thermonuclear war which would have wiped us out. This would not be desirable in a large game called Earth civilization, because the game ends then, basically, and becomes very boring. But we are allowed to have constant wars, because this adds interest and adventure, and we are allowed to have nuclear weapon threats, and maybe this is the origin of Al-Qaeda, in a way. The injection of an unexpected element into the game, which will provide a lot of action and paranoia.
I doubt that for a simple reason, because Al-Qaeda is not credible at all, and it looks like the programmers which programmed our reality have much higher levels. Al-Qaeda is really amateurish programming. I cannot really believe in this kind of items. It could be a child, it could be a child game, you know, who is
a child alien.
A child alien who has made his little bubble of programming, and it didn't
well,
work
indeed,
very well.
If 100,000 or 1 million imaginative aliens are participating in the game of Earth civilization, everybody can put in their input, and whichever is the thread most successfully followed becomes the dominant, become the dominant events within the game.
Yeah, probably it's also they perceive it as a challenge. You know, let's try to see what happens if we put this kind of little toy Al-Qaeda that 5 minutes before is the biggest threat of mankind, and then in the words of the American top commanders, our ally in Syria or our ally in Libya, you know. So to make it a little more confused, you know, and to see probably how the people would react to this kind of absurdities, and they don't react. So it's another probably. I think it's a case study, you know, in order to improve the programming of the game.
And for the alien players.
For the alien players, of course. We're not speaking about humans now. We are just the program.
We are the programmed.
So
people sometimes realize this, such as Ukrainian army commanders who were once science fiction writers, for example.
Yes.
And the constant surprise and low-level destruction and low-level violence on a global scale provides the kind of action which must empower a game that captures the interest of people. You can't have a global utopia game.
Well, it would be an interesting branch.
Well, utopia by definition is totalitarian. In order to maintain the perfect conditions of life for the majority, so that everyone has enough to eat, to breathe, to drink, blah, 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 you have to suppress inequalities, you have to suppress individual ambitions to go beyond the average.
This is a very interesting point, that every society has the ambition to become perfect. This is common to every human society, but perfection of a society is by definition a complete totalitarian state, which is an utopia, of course. That's very, very fascinating.
It would help if the inhabitants of this utopian society were less intelligent than the majority of our acquaintances and friends and the viewers of this talk show, because they would then feel frustrated if they were particularly intelligent and would not submit to a life of simply having enough and not disturbing the equilibrium. So utopia is totalitarian.
And anti-utopia is not much better, actually.
Well, it's totalitarian with nastiness.
Yes, there is a kind of sadistic pleasure in this anti-perfect world.
A sort of Schadenfreude.
So basically the perfect government is by definition a very imperfect one. Yeah,
but an efficient one.
A very inefficient one. The more inefficient. Actually, I found oases, of freedom exactly when I was visiting countries where the previous system had collapsed, and they were experiencing really unusual bubbles of freedom due to the disintegration of the ambition of perfection.
And you cannot allow. In fact, the ideal controllers of such a utopia would be artificial intelligences, operating for our own good. If artificial intelligences do come to operate the majority of systems in the world for our own benefit, rather than us being slaves of the artificial intelligences, their definition of benefit might well be a pastoral society where there are no major risks or challenges, and where you simply stay upon your own planet, living in your own town, not walking on the grass very much in case you crush it, and generally regular.
And with antibiotics.
With antibiotics. This raises the question of population pressure caused by eradicating diseases.
So you need also infertility in the game.
Yes, infertility or population control of some sort. Infertility is a better method than imposing a quota of children.
Absolutely.
Which causes resentment and attempts to break the rules.
But of course, the problem is that if you have to work too much, then this stops to be a very pleasant place to be. So you would also need a pastoral society where you don't have to work too much.
Well, yeah, but that brings the problem of leisure. How do you occupy your leisure hours? We would occupy it with, for example, science fiction, adventures,
exactly.
and
So
games.
You would need, in this case, a more intelligent ratio. My personal theory about the fact that there are so many stupid people in the world, and some of them probably are watching to us right now.
Might be you.
It might be you. Just ask yourself if you are belonging to this category or not. Nobody will say yes. And the point is that the ratio of stupid people, I think it's constant all over the world, in all time frames that we analyze. Probably 1,000 years ago, it was exactly the same. Stupidity is oftenly seen by the intelligent people in a very stupid way as a kind of a lack of intelligence, which is completely wrong. This is a big mistake that intelligent people do, proving that they're stupid all the same. Stupidity, actually, it's a very important feature, unfortunately, in the human society, because it allows society to be stable and not to collapse. Because if everybody would be intelligent, everybody would question what they do, would question the sense of what they do, and they would stop doing it, and they would start doing other things. For example, if you're a baker and you ask yourself, why I'm doing that, why I'm not painting a picture, you would stop to bake the bread and start to paint the picture instead, and nobody would eat on the next day.
It is a form of group solidarity.
Exactly.
Which preserves the community.
The need of the system, of the community, forces everyone, even the intelligent people, to be very stupid most of the time. Some people exaggerate and they are all stupid all the time, of course, but most of the time everybody is stupid, including Nobel Prize winners. Now, in this kind of utopian society, pastoral society with not too many people, which does people who don't want to work too much, otherwise it would not be utopian society but a hell, that we already had in the past. People would need a lot of time, but also to be intelligent enough, for example, to appreciate arts like literature and other things, and not being bored and suicide.
Yeah, but the problem here is that literature is full of disruption. Either classic literature, such as Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, Kafka, these completely disrupt our sense of normality.
When they disrupted our sense of normality, if if we can use it the right way, grows. I mean, our sense of reality is enhanced by...
Yeah, we don't want it to be enhanced though, because then there will be frustration for the people who have this during their leisure time, and then during the rest of the time they have to conform to what is essentially a restricted way of life.
Yeah, I guess it's the big struggle is whether we will end up in a utopian society of incredibly intelligent people who can live philosophically in tune with their environment, or an increasingly lobotomized mankind, which, like in the Brave New World, they simply don't have the mental skills in order to endanger their society. So this is the fascinating challenge would be to have a pastoral, quiet society of people happily living in tune with nature,
but
and
reading science
by reading science fiction,
yes,
and honoring our names, and remembering that we exist,
and imagining the jungles of Venus, and living vicariously in the jungles of Venus, and out among the stars. In faster-than-light starships, travelling to exotic planets and having adventures. It seems relatively likely that there will be no travel to other star systems unless we can discover the Alcubierre space drive works and we're able to warp space and travel quickly to other star systems. This is a hypothetical possibility. But how otherwise do we get anywhere to another star? Generation starships are going to fail, because you cannot send off a community of humans who are going to live within a restricted environment and that their children and grandchildren must sustain in expectation of arriving at what?
At what? And even if they arrive at something, they would probably die there. So it's not very likely that they would arrive to a new favorable planet and they would colonize it. They would just die there because of some accident.
If the planet is favorable, then it is also already occupied by life forms.
Yes, which doesn't like you. And you are with one spaceship against an entire planet who doesn't want you.
Yeah, and if it is unfavorable, but alterable, then it would take you generations and generations more to terraform the planet. You would have to,
if it is possible, because what do you have to terraform? You don't have magic tools. You have just your own poor spaceship, and what can a spaceship contain in terms of hardware? Very little.
A lot of software, but...
but the software doesn't terraform a planet. No, only in a computer simulation could happen.
Yeah, so the worst possible thing for Generation 5, which arrives at a possibly habitable star system, after they have forgotten all about Earth, except on entertainments, which they watch or do not watch because they could be disruptive and cause a sense of resentment. We have the degenerate descendants arriving at a place and discovering that they must remain in their tin can in orbit for another 5 or 10 generations while the planet becomes minimally habitable.
And there is another problem in that, because since they have been born on these spaceships and all the reality is these spaceships, even though they have been taught that they have to terraform and conquer new planets, their inner self, their very deep subconscious doesn't want to do that, obviously, because their comfort zone is inside the spaceship. So they cannot possibly wish to do such a hard job like terraforming a new planet and fighting with aliens when they are so happily integrated and adapted to live inside a friendly spaceship where have been living for generations. So simply the motivation to do that would completely disappear. It should be a religious kind of belief, but this doesn't really stand up against reality, against adaptation, against convenience.
Yeah. Religion is a great motivator. The people on the generation ship, do they have huge records which they can access about planet Earth and life on Earth and all this enormous liberty and gigantic size, compared with which they are living in a tiny prison? Or do they not?
I think they would just, they cannot perceive their tiny prison as a prison as long as they have been born there. They would probably suffer of agoraphobia if they would go in open spaces after having lived in a closed space all the time. They would probably be terrified by seeing the sky, if they would have an experience like that, or of seeing distances. This is the human nature which will block them to do anything actually when they arrive at destination.
Yeah.
And these old films, documentaries about Earth with animals and with spaces, this would be just kind of like the cartoons for us, something completely unreal that you watch for entertainment, but you don't really wish to be inside a cartoon, with Peter Pan.
It's also dangerous to be inside a cartoon. Open spaces which can be hit by an asteroid and destroyed. There is a thread of science fiction stories in which the true future consists of living within habitats and arks and space colonies which you can move around in space, because committing yourself to a life on a planetary surface is committing yourself to being back in the 10,000 years ago when agriculture first developed. A life of pain, deprivation, hard toil, and also the possibility of being wiped out for any number of reasons, by plagues or whatever else.
Yes, because planets require nature.
Yeah.
And nature usually wants to kill you because of Darwin. Darwin is the culprit.
Yeah.
While in a spaceship you don't have Darwin. Darwin is not admitted inside, so you don't have any kind of life form that wants to kill you if you didn't put it inside, like Alien, for example. In the Hollywood movies, But usually you don't have little monsters growing inside you in a spaceship. It's quite a safe environment.
It's quite a safe environment, but you can't maintain 100% recycling of food and air and
this is a little problem.
Forever. You need resources. So the ideal future environment would be a giant space colony which has access to raw materials which are obviously easier to manipulate in space by catching a small asteroid or comet core.
Or also clouds of gas.
Clouds of gas.
I think that this is a very nice environment for a spaceship, because in clouds of gas you can probably extract a lot of resources that you can use inside.
Yeah, the most inefficient way would be to go down to the surface of a planet in order to dig up uranium or whatever else.
Yeah, probably the best environment and absolutely is just to dive into clouds of forming stars, which are dense enough to provide you with all the elements that you need, but they still have no mass. I mean, no structure that can harm you, and no heat and no nothing. But so you just jump, from star to star, which is forming suck, what you can suck, and then go on to the next.
Then go on. Taking a few hundred years about going on, unless we develop the Alcubierre space drive.
Yeah, I think that probably some more intelligent way to move through space will be invented by then. Otherwise, all this will be impossible simply.
So our future science fiction writers, 200 years ahead, let us imagine them living on a future Earth where civilization has not collapsed and where there has been moderate exploitation and colonization of the solar system. Now, we never see examples of imaginary future science fiction writers writing science fiction further into the future.
Never.
And why is this? It's a failure of the imagination.
This is a real failure of the imagination of the people who imagine the future. It's just like you can imagine only one step into the future without imagining that also the people in the future will simply imagine the future. So that's very, very, very strange. I mean, we have thousands and thousands of science fiction authors, many of them as also full of prizes, Hugo prizes, Nebula prizes. They earn millions of dollars, and they cannot imagine that in the future somebody will be a science fiction writer. This is something that really disconcerting.
There must be some example.
There must be some, like an exception, of course.
Oh, yeah, but supposing that there is not, and even so, it is our duty to write a science fiction work which includes science fiction writers of the future.
Credible science fiction writers of the future.
I need to write a sequel to The Brain from Beyond, and I think that I might actually invoke at least one. No, he would be a madman.
One is always a man.
One is always a man.
Must be a community.
The community of future science fiction writers.
And of course, we could also imagine that also some of the science fiction that these science fiction writers of the future will write will include imagination about a science fiction writer of their future. So, because also somebody in the, if this is the pattern now, I mean, if today science fiction writers today have not imagination enough to imagine that in the future somebody will write science fiction, this will likely be the same scenario in the future. So also the science fiction writers of the future will be dumb enough not to imagine that in the future they will have a science fiction writer. So we can imagine that all the science fiction writer will also not imagine, but one exception will appear of somebody who actually will think, why is nobody imagining that the future will produce science fiction writers? And he will write another. So it can be an interesting kind of matryoshka of science fiction writers. One Chinese boxes.
Yes. Except in reverse, because the matryoshka should not be within, it should be without.
Yes. Yes.
Inverted matryoshka science fiction writers. Yeah, right, I feel the necessity to write something like this.
Yes, it's a moral duty at this point.
I think
the beloved science fiction writer of the beloved future.
Yeah.
Something.
I think it is because it takes so much imagination and effort and energy to imagine a future, a consistent future, that to imagine this extra element is
destabilizing. Probably.
It's destabilizing. Yeah.
It's
well, we have our work arranged for us for the next 10 years now.
Yes, we have to write all the science fiction that the science fiction writers of the future will have to write.
Yes, including or not including further matryoshka science fiction writers.
Yes, there is always one step more that we can try to imagine.
Well, there is always one step more with regard to our understanding of the universe. So why should there not always be one step more with regard to our vision of science fiction?
Science fiction has actually now a very critical problem, in my very personal opinion, is that the current science fiction now is basically, in my own view, unable to completely grasp the present. Science fiction, of course, is naturally born in the mind of a person and makes him a writer when he or she understands that the future will be different from the present due to technological and scientific innovation. But the problem is that when you stop to understand properly the present, how can you still write credible, realistic or plausible future? And I make better my point. I think that most of the science fiction authors now, for example, have no understanding whatsoever of the kind of skills reached by people in power in manipulating the perception of reality through, by the way of what I call kind of black sociology science. This means a way to actively manipulate the perception of what's going on. There has been already studies by Edward Bernays, which was the nephew of Freud, in the 40s, 50s, I don't remember which period, about how to change the way of thinking of a multitude of people. Basically, he even planned, just to mention the power that this kind of thinking can lead to. He actually is one of the culprits of the fact that women started to smoke, because because actually he wanted to increase the public, the market of people who would smoke, and he made interesting advertising. He planned advertising campaigns in order to have women starting to smoke with success. And it can be searched on the internet. If you look for Edward Bernays women smoking, you will find it. But this was half a century and more ago. Meanwhile, the capability to create myths, enduring myths, which all people believe, including science fiction writers, has reached new levels, and if science fiction writers are not able to see behind this smoke screen of myths, how can they write about a plausible future which is not a kind of uchronia? This means a place in a time which does not exist, a kind of parallel universe starting from an non-existent present.
A lot of science fiction writers regard themselves as aiming to be extremely successful functionaries within an existing framework of science fiction which appeals to the largest number of people. The other ones who like to be a bit different, perhaps by employing irony or
surrealism.
Surrealism, yes. They obviously appeal to a smaller group of readers, and they can expect far less success. I think the dream and ambition of at least 85% of would-be science fiction writers is to fit within the framework, the commercial framework now of success.
I think this is also very much a matter, not just a matter of ambition, but of Darwinian natural selection, because those writers who by chance happen to match into the dominant framework, of mainstream science fiction, they simply get money from what they do, and they can continue doing it. And they're forced to continue to do that because they get something for that.
But also
while those who write something which nobody would appreciate and nobody would buy, they cannot dedicate all the time doing that, because they have also to provide food for themselves. I have some experience in that. So in this case, of course, their production is
much smaller.
Yeah.
And the most dominant and successful science fiction writers will feel warmly happy and gratified in a positive feedback loop that they are
which also will kind of push them to continue to write exactly what provides them the gratification in a kind of Pavlovian scheme. Because the problem of art, not only science fiction, is success. As soon as you have success in art, you get conditioned in a Pavlovian way, to repeat what produced you the prize for your efforts. So basically, you stop to evolve really, usually. And there are some exceptions, but usually you stop to evolve and you just continue to repeat what has been proven right for your surviving, for your happiness, for your prize. So writers who become very, very popular, they just continue to write the same book again and again. Artists that produce the same kind of art again and again. That's an exception of people who really can innovate because they cannot make a sense out of existence if they don't continue to evolve, but this is a minority.
Or they become bored, completely bored
Exactly.
by doing the same thing again. and
Those
again.
who are really good and they become really bored, but then these people go on, and these are the real jewels of mankind, you know.
Yeah.
But they're still a minority.
And let us remember that when people talk about science fiction, they are also including fantasy, which is possibly about 80% of the product
by now,
produced.
yes.
And that is even more so a recapitulation of recapitulations with a little flavouring of something different, a different brand of magic injected, a different design for a medieval sociology, a different religion. But these are all extremely conservative products. And one of the things built into these is that they should be repeatable in the form of 10-volume sagas.
Yes, yes. This is now the actual trend of this escapist literature. So, if the purpose of intellectual activity like reading becomes escapism, to escape from your own reality, then the books must be longer and longer. Because you have to stay out of your reality as long as possible.
And why should we want to escape into a pseudo-medieval framework when life is really pretty nasty and death is really around the corner all the time?
Sometimes also before the corner.
Well, yeah.
The public has enjoyed 5 seconds of silence so they could think.
Yes, and make little notes. We could possibly regard fantasy as the dark matter of science fiction.
Yes, but you can see it. It's the
Yeah.
dark matter that you can see.
You can see it in every shop.
Yes.
So
But an interesting question. In the far future, you know, when, of course, too much. Now we live in an era of background noise because in the past, in the times of Darwin, if you came out with a book like the Evolution book, nobody could really ignore it because there were very few people, first of all, that could read. And these people had very few books to read. So you put them in the book, they could say this is blasphemy, but they could not ignore it. Now we live in an age where there are too many books, too many products, and they increase every year, and less readers.
Yeah.
Less and less readers.
And acceleration. Darwin could wait 10 years before publishing his book because he knew it was unique. And it was the pace of scientific discovery was slow, so he could just put off for 1 decade releasing it. You cannot do that nowadays. You dare not. You are racing to be ahead of your competitors in discovering the new little twist.
Yes, when a few years ago we discussed about writing the story for a film about a society in which animals would start to rebel to human beings and attack them, and we hesitating in finalizing the project. Now there is a TV series called The Zoo, who actually has stolen our ideas from our minds. It was exactly our ideas, but we had a very good ending, and I don't know if these people of the series arrived to the same.
Well, we won't know until they just come to the end of the series.
We will discover that.
Well, if they have envisaged the end of the series or are improvising.
Yes, like it's more and more the fashion now in film production because nobody cares anyway. Yeah, well, now you have this problem that if you have a brilliant theory like of the same value of the Darwin theory or more, like for example the Julian James theory about the origin of consciousness, and which was written in the 70s, I think 75 or something like that. This means a lot of decades ago. Then you may have possibly this book being known to very few people because it's hidden in the background noise of too many books and too many things to read that people can avoid to do to read.
So, for example, Richard Dawkins has to mention Julian James, but he mentions him in about 10 dismissive words. And
this has been Richard Dawkins mentions Julian James' book, The Origin of Consciousness, in the breakdown of the bicameral mind. Inside his book, God's delusion, the delusion of God,
it's
something like that. Which actually
the God delusion.
The God delusion, yes. Actually, which we didn't read. I mean, I didn't read it, and because when we were in Oxford in the bookshop,
we opened it.
See the book, we opened to see if he would make any reference to Julian James, who made a very good argument about the whole concept of God, to see what Dawkins would think about, and the whole thing that he could say in one sentence is that this kind of ideas is just. Something like the biggest stroke of genius of history, or something nonsense, probably the latter. So he just confesses that he didn't understand the book, and he permits himself to insult it and to mock it without an argument, to dismiss its arguments. Mm-hmm. So basically he didn't understand the book.
It deserved at least 2 paragraphs.
Of serious arguments.
Analysis
and arguments. There was no argument whatsoever, just only a superficial mockery. So, which means that in a way, the fact itself that he mentioned the book, it means that it surfaced his mind as a problem. He read it, he didn't understand it, and he just discharged it. It's like a kind of tribal sacrifice, you just burned the image on the fire, hoping that it goes away.
Well, it was not even so dramatic as that. It was just casual. But there is the Julian James thinks, and then he just threw it onto the floor.
But with a mockery. Mockery, and this is really not very intellectual. It looks like tribal, actually.
Because you can attack the book quite easily.
You can destroy every book if you have arguments. Otherwise...
Well, something which you feel obliged to mention, but just then casually within a few words dismiss, should either not be mentioned, but you have to mention it because it is significant, or it deserves a little bit more space.
So in the future, you could have eventually all bulk of ancient fantasy be the dark matter of literature, of science fiction. I mean, it could disappear in the background noise, because I suppose that there is still a little bit of Darwinian evolution in information and in arts. So actually, we have cases like Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, the great composer, who now is regarded as one of the best musicians ever in the history of mankind, who was basically unknown in his own time, and he got forgotten immediately. He disappeared from history immediately, because inside the little background noise of that time of the people who were politically more important than him. And he was the reason why we know him now is just because the man went one time into a butcher shop to buy some meat, and the meat was just packaged in some paper that he discovered being paper with music, written. And score, partitura, yes. And this was actually the original Bach partituras. And the man went back and said, "Where did you take this paper?" And the butcher said, "Well, I found a big stock here upstairs." And the man had this luck to buy. If he would have been a vegetarian, we would not know Bach by now. But this man was Mendelssohn Bartholdy, another very big musician, very important musician. And due to his genius to recognize the old genius of Bach, now we have Bach. If he would be a vegetarian or not Mendelssohn Bartholdy, then we would have not Bach. Now, this is to say that in time, real meaningful information can actually be preserved by mankind in this kind of Darwinian process, and all the rest disappear in all the important musicians of the time of Bach has disappeared because they were basically irrelevant. The other ones, I mean, and the same could happen also to science fiction and eventually also to fantasy. You could have all the bulk of not really relevant fantasy, which makes up probably 80% of what's published today, disappear in the history of the future, like the dark matter of science fiction.
Even though it still exists, because you could record all human knowledge on DNA, which has long-term preservation value, in a few bottles of liquid holding DNA. We can have everything retained, but because the amount of material retained is so enormous.
Yes, we have the problem of background noise.
Yeah, background noise.
In a moment where everything is known, nothing can be. It's like the problem of divinity, if there would be something like that, because an imaginary God who knows everything, he would have incredible problem in going through the background noise of all his knowledge. So basically, he would be lost.
He'd be very slow.
Very slow, and because how can you have a processor fast enough to process all the existing information of all times and places in one instant in order to look for what it would be completely lost.
Well, we can only struggle on.
Yeah.
We can attempt to preserve the glory of the science fiction of the golden age.
It's reflecting, it's like that, it's not reflecting.
As in my space-time opera, and go forth into the future, preserving the glories of ancient, now disproven totally science fiction, but maintaining the rhapsody, thrill and beauty that we felt when we first experienced it. And with a sense of irony, carrying it on in a different mode.
Yes, sounds good. And if we want to close our talk show, we could invite
the radiator.
The radiator has been very silent the whole time, but is heating.
It's something to do with entropy.
Yes, it's increasing entropy in our video. Yes. What we can recommend you, if you would still like to continue to listen to us, even when we will stop speaking in a few seconds, is to buy online our book, The Beloved of My Beloved, our common book that we wrote years ago. It took almost 10 years to write the book, so it's a particular value, and it's 9 out of 10 people cannot bear it, cannot read it, because they suffer the disruption of reality in their mind as soon as they start after one page. But if you resisted in this video until this moment and didn't switch it off, then probably it would be a mind-boggling revelation for your mind. So it's a book that you absolutely have to read, or you will be not forgiven in the afterlife.
Yeah, and your afterlife will be less rich. That's all, folks.
We will now make the dance of the the dance of the closing video.